Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. This is Megha here, your tax expert for the evening. Hope you all are having a great festive season. We'll wait for a couple of minutes for participants to join, and then we'll begin our session. All right, so we have enough participants. So we'll start with today's session. So the agenda for today's session, as we can see, is simplifying for your financial lives. So here we will be covering investment declarations. And what is an investment declaration? What is the need for to submit investment declaration to your employer? What happens if we do not? And we will also be looking at the investments or expenses which are eligible for deduction from your salary. All right. So first up, this is the agenda. What is an investment declaration? Then expenses eligible for the deduction, investments under Section 80C. Then going beyond 80C, what are the alternatives a person has beyond 80C to invest? Then what constitutes proof of investments? What happens if you have missed the submission window proof with your employer? So essentially, an investment declaration, now all of us know when we join a new company or even in the existing company, we get multiple mails from our HR or the finance team telling us that we need to submit proof of investments. If we have invested in LIC insurance policy or a health policy, they ask us to declare whatever are the investments that are eligible for a tax deduction. Now that is essentially an investment declaration. Typically, an investment declaration is made at the beginning of the financial year, and that is made on an estimate basis. You don't have to have the exact values with you, and it is not the declaration is not limited to investments alone. It also covers various expenses such as tuition fee paid, home loan repayment, etc. Now, the form that is submitted to the employer is Form 12BP. Now, this form is only submitted to the employer and not the tax authority. Now, the importance of doing the right investment declaration early on is it leads to a higher enhanced salary. If your employer is aware of your investments and your deductions, which will help you save taxes, the amount of TDS will be lesser from your salary. And as a result, you will get a higher enhanced salary every month. Now, what are the expenses eligible for deductions? Let us first look at the expenses, then we will move on to deductions under section 80C, which are available on an investment basis. The first and the foremost expense is the HRA expense. Now, most of us are aware, if you are living in a rented unit, then we get to claim house rent allowance. Now, house rent allowance is exempt least of the following limits. It is either 40 or 50% of your basic salary. It is 50% of your basic salary if you're residing in any one of the metro cities, that is Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, or Hyderabad. If you're living in any other city in India, it is restricted to 40% of your basic salary. The next component is the actual amount of HRA received. The third component is actual rent paid, whatever is the actual rent paid minus 10% of your basic salary. The least of the above three is allowed as a exemption. Now, please remember, HRA is allowed only under the old tax regime and it is not allowed under the new tax regime. Next up is your housing loan interest. Now, if you're paying a housing loan interest payment up to rupees 2 lakh on a self-occupied property is allowed. Now, this deduction of rupees 2 lakh, please remember, is allowed only from the year in which you get the possession. Let's say you have taken a loan on a property which is still under construction. If the property is still under construction, then you will not be allowed to claim the home loan interest during the period of construction. Whatever is the pre-construction interest that you've paid, it will be allowed from the year in which you get the possession. And this pre-construction interest will be allowed in 5 equal installments from the year in which you get the possession. And this is still within the overall limits of rupees 2 lakhs. Next up, as a thumb rule, HRA and housing loan interest are not allowed together. It is a choice between HRA or housing loan. However, there are certain cases where both are allowed. Let's say for part of the year you stayed in a rented accommodation, and for the remaining part of the year you bought a new home and you have taken a home loan. In such cases, both are allowed. In another case where we've seen both HRA and home loan interest is allowed is, let's say you live in another city wherein you are paying interest on home loan. However, for the purposes of employment, you have to move to a new city. Let's say you're a resident of Bangalore, you have a own house here and you're paying interest on loan for that house. However, for work purposes, you have to shift to Pune, and in Pune, you rent out an accommodation. In such cases, both HRA and housing loan shall be allowed. Next is leave travel allowance. Now, leave travel allowance is typically allowed only twice in a block of 4 years. The current block of the years are from the year 2022 to 2025. Now, between these 4 years, if you have undertaken any domestic travel, please remember, only domestic travel is allowed, international travel is not allowed. If you have traveled domestically with your spouse or your children, in that case, the round trip fare of that trip will be allowed. Remember, only the travel fare is allowed in first class train or economy flights, and your hotel stay or any other expenditure you incur is not allowed. In cases where train or economy flight is not available between the two places, in such case, whatever is the approved mode of transportation or whatever is the state government transportation available, that shall be allowed. Next up, we have petrol and driver expenditure. So if you have a car or if you have a chauffeur which you're using for the purposes of your employment, then you have expenses allowed subject to the limits. Apologies, we had a small technical glitch. Next, we have food coupons and Sodexo coupons. So here again, a maximum amount of rupees 26,400 per annum is allowed. So the math of that comes up to 2 meals per day for 22 days in a month, and at the rate of rupees 50 per meal is allowed. So the annual amount comes up to rupees 26,400. Can you all see the PPT? Please let me know if you can see the PPT or not. All right, guys, we've been getting questions and comments saying that, you are not able to see the PPT, or there are, questions. So it's okay. Please listen to us attentively. If you have any questions, please put them down on the chat box. And at the end of the session, we'll answer all your questions. So far we have discussed the expenses eligible for deductions, that is your HRA expenditure or your leave travel allowance or interest on home loan repayment, etc. Now let us take a look at the investments under section 80C, which are eligible for deductions. Now 80C, as we know, is the most popular section. Every layman out there knows something or the other about 80C. Now let us look at 80C a little bit more in detail today. The first and foremost deduction under section 80C is the contribution to employee provident fund or public provident fund. Now, what exactly is employee provident fund? It is a small contribution made towards the social security of a person, which is deducted from his salary. Now, whatever is the deduction made by the employer, an equal and matching contribution is also made by the employer, and together this amount is then deposited to another fund. So EPF again is limited to 12% of your basic salary. Similar to EPF, we also have another investment product, which is the voluntary provident fund. Now it is an extension of EPF itself. So if an employee wants to contribute more than 12% of his basic salary to the EPF fund, then he or she can adopt the VPF route and make such contributions. The last here we have PPF, that is Public Provident Fund. Now in Public Provident Fund, the investment can also be made in the name of the spouse and the child in addition to the individual himself. This is restricted to a maximum limit of rupees 1,50,000 per annum. Next up, we have contribution to premium in respect of life insurance policies. Now, here are a couple of things. This is also under the overall limit of section 80C of rupees 1,50,000. The policy must be taken from an approved insurer by the IRDAI. The policy can be in the name of self, spouse, or the children, and the deduction will be allowed only in the year of payment, not before that. Next stream of investment is the investment in ELSS, that is equity linked saving schemes. Now, in this, there is a minimum lock-in of 3 consecutive years. After this lock-in, if you're withdrawing the amount, only then it is eligible for 80C deduction. It is available both in the form of a lump sum investment or an SIP. Now, please remember, the capital gains that happens at the time of sale of these ELSs, they are not exempt from taxes. On that, capital gains will have to be computed, and if the capital gains are eligible for taxation, the same will have to be paid. Next investment that we have is investment in fixed deposit. Now in fixed deposit, the investment should be in a minimum lock-in period of 5 years. Only those FDs which have a minimum lock-in of 5 years are eligible for 80C. Next, the interest that you receive on these FDs is taxable on a year-on-year basis. Please note the interest is not exempt. Next expense eligible under ATC is the tuition fee. Now, the tuition fee that you're paying for the admission in a school, college, or university of your child is allowed as a deduction. Please note that only tuition fee is allowed. If there are any development charges being paid or any donations, the same is not allowed. The other investments under Section 80C are contribution to the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, then investment in National Savings Scheme or investment in Post Office Deposit Scheme, again with a lock-in of 5 years or NABARD bond, etc. Now, let us look a little beyond ATC. Here we are looking at a few pension products. So there are various avenues in which you can invest for your retirement under various pension products. So the first one is under Section 80CCC. Now, in this case, if you're investing in any annuity plan of the LIC or any other approved insurer for pension from an approved fund, the contribution will be allowed as a deduction. The maximum contribution that you can make under this pension plan is rupees 1,50,000. Next, we have Section 80CCD1 and 80CCD2. I am presuming most of you all must be aware of this section because a lot of